Hi and welcome back to the Girl Gone London channel. If you're new here, my name is Kaylin. I'm a dual UK and US citizen, and today we're clearing up some often asked questions about the UK and the US and beans. Because I know the phrase is technically we are separated by a common language, but honestly, I feel like we are very much separated by baked beans. This is one area where you can easily think you know what someone is talking about, but actually what each country thinks of as baked beans are totally different, and the way they eat them is totally different, and it gets confusing on both sides of the pond. But before we get to the expose on UK versus US baked beans, let's go over some of the other differences between UK and US beans, because I'm not just gonna spill the beans this early in the video. I know every time I try and it's not natural. Okay, anyway, funny story. Also, I went to research this video and I Googled UK versus US beans, and look what appears on page 1, an article by me talking about whether Americans eat beans on toast, so now I am informing my own videos from the past. Anyway, beans of all types are enjoyed in both countries. You can use them in chili, veggie burgers, eat them as side dishes. Beans are an important part of the diet in both UK and US citizens for the most part, but that's where a lot of the similarities end. So basically the similarity is like we know what beans are and we eat them. However, difference number 1 is what we call them. So as usual, when researching this topic, I quickly realized that we have different names for quite a few different types of beans. First up, the butter bean in the UK is known as the lima bean in the US, though it can also be called a butter bean sometimes in the American South. Typically, the lima bean is green and is just the younger version of the butter bean, which is white, but it's the same bean. Then you have runner beans versus green beans. Correct me if I'm wrong, because my green bean expertise only goes back about 20 minutes, but it appears runner beans are a completely different plant to the green bean, not a type of green bean, though they do look similar. I definitely hear runner beans more often in England. In the US, I had never heard of a runner bean before, and we only usually talk about green beans. According to Wikipedia, runner beans were actually grown as food in North America in the 1600s, but over time they became more used as just an ornamental plant for the garden, which may explain why runner beans were new to me when I moved to the UK. But to further complicate the issue, then you've got string beans, which I've heard of and we do eat in the US, and some sources say this is what the Brits call a runner bean, while other sources say no, runner beans are a larger version of string beans. So someone with a food background, please jump in here, because we need to know the difference between green beans and runner beans and string beans, and the internet was not very helpful. Well, it kind of thought it was being helpful, but it gave me 20 different answers. So YouTube comments, begin. Other language differences involves the haricot bean in the UK, which I definitely did just Google how to pronounce because I thought it was haricot.
Haricot beans. Haricot beans.
This is called a navy bean in the US because we don't know how to pronounce it. And then there is a chickpea, which are basically always called chickpeas in the UK, but sometimes called garbanzo beans in the US. Okay, difference number 2 when it comes to beans in the UK and the US is refried beans. One method of bean consumption that is really popular in America are refried beans, and this is due to the Hispanic influence. Refried beans are really good, and they're an important side to many Mexican dishes and often used within things like burritos. So it makes sense that many Brits may have not tried them because the influence of Mexican cooking in the UK is not very strong for obvious reasons, but I thought I'd give them a shout out because they're amazing. You can buy them in a can, but if you make them at home, refried beans are typically made by cooking pinto beans once, the first go round, then cooking up some spices and onions and garlic, and then adding the beans to a skillet and mashing them while cooking them again. Difference number 3 in this video has to do with the source of beans and bean production. Now, for the record, in case anyone doubts my commitment to these in-depth videos, I literally read a study that was called The Analysis of UK Demand and Value Chain for Beans to help me research this section. So there you go, the things I do. Anyway, another difference in beans between countries is that the US is in the top 10 consistently of the world's producer of beans. It kind of varies between like place 4 and place 7 depending on what website you go to, but we're just going to say top 10. The UK only produces a very, very small number of beans. The UK actually imports large quantities of beans from the US, and most of the demand for beans in the UK is concentrated around the beans for baked beans. So difference number 4, you've made it this far. You're like, Kaylin, I literally do not care about pinto beans or refried beans. I came here for the baked beans chat. So settle in, here we go. What are baked beans in the UK and what are baked beans in the US are so not the same. Actually, that's not like 1,000% true because the actual bean, the navy bean or the haricot bean, is the same. That's where it ends. British baked beans are sold in a can, with Heinz being the most prominent brand. Guys, comment below on your favorite brand of baked beans because I'm not sure I really eat Heinz baked beans anymore because I'm cheap. So like the Asda version typically does okay, but I know some people are, Heinz through and through. Anyway, the beans in the UK are sold in a can. And it's put in a thin tomato-based sauce. It's not sweet, it's not smoky, it's not overpowering. It's a nice like savory flavor, and there's no meat in a can of British baked beans. American baked beans can be sold in a can, but are also often a homemade dish. For the record, you obviously could make British style baked beans on your own, but I've never heard of anyone doing that. If we compare the canned version, we'll discover that American baked beans are the same bean, like I said, but the sauce is a rich molasses type sauce with lots of brown sugar. So the resulting flavor is smoky and sweet, and usually you'll find a bit of bacon bits in them, particularly in a brand called like Bush's. So here's an example of some American baked beans in a can. If you make American baked beans at home, which many people do, you'll use similar ingredients, but you may have your own twist to make them barbecue flavored or whatever else you want to add. It's interesting though, because Heinz baked beans are not British in their origin. They were actually first introduced by an American named Henry Heinz in the early 1900s as a great pre-cooked meal at the end of a long day at the factory. They were called baked beans because the beans are baked in a tomato sauce. But this version of baked beans didn't take off in the US like it did in the UK, and today it's been said that Brits eat more baked beans than any country in the world. Fun fact as well, the British baked beans used to include portions of meat, but meat rationing during World War II put a stop to this and it never came back. The evolution of American-style baked beans, again, the kind of sweet, smoky, barbecue-flavored beans, seems to have its origins in the northeast of the US, where towns like Boston created the Boston baked bean, which has the molasses in the sauce, so they're coated in more of like a glaze rather than a thin sauce. In some parts of the US, interestingly enough, maple syrup is actually still used, which dates back to Native American recipes. Now, difference number 5 has to do with how we eat the baked beans. So we know they taste completely different, but let's discuss how they're eaten because this is going to horrify people on both sides of the arguments. So Brits tend to eat baked beans on top of things. Toast, jacket potatoes. My husband eats baked beans with pizza, pie, chips, the list goes on. But you don't just like dig into a can of Heinz baked beans or serve it up like on its own. It becomes part of a pairing. Americans eat baked beans with things as a side dish, as in you take spoonfuls of the beans on their own. You would typically have it in like a barbecue setting, so you might have a hot dog, a hamburger, some baked beans, mac and cheese, but it's its own part of the meal as a side dish, similar to how you wouldn't eat, well, most people, you wouldn't put like mac and cheese on your hot dog, you just eat it with a hot dog. Same thing for the beans. And I think the reason this blows people's minds on whichever side of the baked bean fence you sit is because the taste is so different, each type works best the way that they eat it. American baked beans with their smoky barbecue flavor mean they are enjoyable on their own, but would probably taste disgusting on a piece of toast, whereas British baked beans, I would argue, not amazing just on their own, but they become amazing when they're poured on top of something to create that combination of flavor and texture. So when you see all these memes on the internet of Americans being like, ew, British people eat that, or British people wondering why Americans don't eat beans on things, they just taste so different that it is hard to compare. Now, if you're wondering about my own British baked beans consumption, considering I've lived here for 10 years, yes, I do like British baked beans. I do like them on toast. I like them on potatoes. I like them with chips/fries. I like them with pizza. And yes, American friends, I do like American baked beans as well. This is quite an unpopular opinion on the internet, given my research on all the British people hating on American baked beans and American people saying, why would you put that on a piece of bread, like I talked about. But I am pro baked beans. Just in general, I believe that we should not have to choose between them. Each has their own contributions to make to the world, and I believe in baked beans as a concept. One more fascinating difference for you though, if you've ever wondered why a can of Heinz baked beans tastes different in the US than the UK, even though it looks like exactly the same can, the US version probably has additional sugar added. So if you visit the US from the UK and are desperate for your favorite baked beans, just be prepared that they're still not going to taste exactly like what you would expect. You might want to go the extra mile, pack some in your checked luggage if you're that into baked beans and can't wait till you get home. But of course, as Americans do, we add extra sugar to everything, including a can of Heinz baked beans. Now that brings us to the end of our video. Comment below and let me know if you've ever tried American baked beans. And if you haven't, what do you like to pair with your British baked beans? Also, again, let me know your favorite brand of baked beans because, like I said, I'm not sure the last time I've had Heinz baked beans. We mostly eat own brand baked beans. So am I missing out? Are you a Heinz person through and through, or do you have your own store-bought or store brand of beans? Anyway, I've said beans a lot in the last 10 minutes, so I'm gonna go now. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.